Are we about to get a very exciting Babylon 5 announcement? And has JMS already hinted at it? Welcome to Sidetrack, your sci-fi TV and movie channel. So on this channel, I've talked a couple of times now about how Babylon 5 was going to get a reboot, a reimagining. Now, JMS, the writer, J. Michael Straczynski, actually announced this just over a year ago. The plan was to put the series on the CW. But then the CW got sold, and Nexstar bought it, and a big proponent of the Babylon 5 project, who was the CEO at the time, left. Pedowitz, I think was his name, but I might be wrong. But anyway, so what's happening now? Well, thanks to one of my friends over at the Babylon 5 Grey 17 podcast, Scott, who does follow JMS on Patreon, I got a message saying that actually JMS has just dropped an interesting message. He basically said, I've just had a very interesting phone call from Warner Brothers. Bum, bum, bum. So I got onto the phone to a couple of close sources that I have that work in and around the industry. Now, they've been sort of whispering to me for a little while that there's been internal conversations at Warner Brothers about Babylon 5. So I actually told you a year ago, Warner Brothers would prefer Babylon 5 to go onto HBO Max, not the CW. They think it would just be a better fit for the streaming service rather than the CW network. Since Nexstar took over the CW, they've been spending far more of their investment on more family-friendly television and moving away from things like the DC. I mean, they just spent a crap load of money getting the golf for the CW network, so that tells you the sort of demographic they're now aiming for. So it seemed even more likely that HBO Max would end up being the target for a new Babylon 5 reboot. The problem being, though, that the CW actually has first dibs contractually. They have the option to take Babylon 5 first. So I got onto the phone. I asked if there'd been any changes. And one source came back to me, and I have to admit, this is going to be very much in the rumor category. They are not 100% certain about this, but they've said they have heard a rumor that in the last week or two, the CW had actually declined its option to Babylon 5, following Warner Brothers asking repeatedly. That then triggered a bunch of internal conversations for them trying to decide what they wanted to do, what sort of money they would want to pay for a project like the Babylon 5 reimagining, and what's the timescale they'd be looking at. That then caused them to trigger a conversation with JMS, the phone call he may have received. So the phone call wouldn't have not have been to phone him to say it's greenlit, let's crack on. According to my source, it's more likely that the phone call was to say, we would love you to come in to have a conversation. We want to go through what we're thinking. We want to know what you're thinking. And then from there, we want to put a plan together. Now, there's going to be a long way to go until we actually get an official announcement, I think. But by that, I think potentially weeks is possible. There needs to be conversations about things like the planned budget, again, the time frame, what sort of hours they would want, because again, I don't think this will be a 22, 24 episode season like maybe the CW would have ordered. I think it's more likely, and the source has said to me that at most we're going to get probably a 10 hours first season, but my source thinks it's more likely that HBO Max would order a mini series. So basically what he said to me here is that think about like how Battlestar Galactica got rebooted all those years ago. Now for the Ronald D. Moore version, we got the mini series first that told that initial big story. And then off the popularity of that, we got the series. Now it's a slightly different way of basically doing movie than series. In this way, you get sort of like a straight to HBO Max mini series movie that will then lead into a new series. Now, I actually think that's quite interesting because it could be quite a safe way for HBO Max to do this. I actually do think the Babylon 5 project is risky. Now, I actually trust JMS. I think he's one of the best writers out there. I do follow him on Twitter, and to be honest, his tweets crack me up every single pig in time. They're so funny. He is a bit of a genius. But Babylon 5 is quite a difficult sci-fi show. It's very popular, but it is quite niche. It's quite dark in places, and I think it very much was set in its time. Reimagining it has never been done before, particularly when you think about the actual showrunner doing it. I just think about there are so many ways this show could go wrong. If the casting is even slightly wrong and slightly out, and people don't like some of the actors that end up in the big starring roles, like Jakar or Sheridan, then I can see people turning against it quite quickly. I also think, unfortunately, with the hate clicking social media way we do things nowadays, that it will get a lot of negative publicity into the run up. I think a lot of that will be tempered by the fact that JMS will actually be in charge and writing the series. But if you look at a lot of the crap that went around about Quantum Leap before that got rebooted, it was vile and very negative, and actually the show's pretty good. So none of it was warranted, but it still happened. And unfortunately, I think there is a big threat of that again. So we may get a Babylon 5 reimagining, and we may get an announcement really soon. That program may not be the full series, 24 episodes that we maybe want, but 10, 12 episodes on HBO Max, where really, if you also think about it, JMS will not have any handcuffs. He will not have any restrictions on what he can do with the show. On HBO Max, he can pretty much do whatever he wants. On the CW, the family-friendly CW, they might put some restrictions on sort of like the age rating of the TV show. So that could be an issue for me. I don't really want a soft family-friendly version of Babylon 5. I would like the JMS version of Babylon 5. And I just think HBO might be a more sensible location for that. Finally, if you compare Babylon 5 to Star Trek for a second, Babylon 5 was always darker, always more real. You know, the overriding story and the overarching actual moral of the story of Babylon 5 was that change is always possible, that change happens, and that sometimes you have to fight to get that change, and that change can hurt. But in the end, it's necessary. Star Trek had a different moral to the story. Star Trek was kind of more like what we can achieve if we all keep going in that right direction. That kindness and love and understanding will eventually beat all the anger and the hate that most of us seem to carry around in our hearts. Star Trek was the glossed over version of a future. Babylon 5 was always a more realistic, more real version of the future, a warts and all version. And I always really loved that. But a modern version of that story is going to have to be darker again, I think, than Babylon 5, or it'll miss the target, because we have so much television since B5 that is much darker, much grittier, much more warts and all. For Babylon 5 to succeed, JMS has got to be given the freedom to do what he wants to tell the story, but he's also got to make sure that he actually tells a story that people are still going to be interested in today. And that is easier on HBO Max than it is on the CW. But guys, get to the comments. Tell me what you think about this potential news. And I'm going to say again, rumor, but it really does look like B5 is about to get announced. Weeks, hopefully. And I'm absolutely certain JMS will tell us first on Patreon or his Twitter account. I will try and get you the news as quickly as I possibly can as well, though. But get into the comments. Tell me what you think. Is this something that's exciting? A reimagining, not a reboot? Is that a problem of concern for you? Or actually, you know, is it just something we just want to see what JMS comes up with, basically, because I just think he's one of the best writers out there, and I'm really excited to see what he comes up with. But get in the comments. Tell me exactly what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and it really helps us out. Also, if you want to join us on Patreon, you get to see most of our videos before everybody else on YouTube and without the adverts, just for a small fee each month that really supports the channel. As always, please stay safe, and I'll see you next time.